Festivals of Light. The deluge and the 7 days of brilliant light immediately preceding it were a universal experience, and they left indelible memories. Many of the religious rites and observances of all creeds go back to these events of the past, in which the celestial gods Saturn and Jupiter were the main participants. Among the most ancient of all such observances were the Festivals of Light of 7 days, duration held in honor of Saturn. 7 days of light just before the deluge overwhelmed the earth are recreated in these feasts. Herodotus describes a nocturnal light festival held each year at Sais in commemoration of Osiris's death and resurrection. It was called the Feast of Lamps. There is one night in which the inhabitants all burn a multitude of lights in the open air round their houses. These burned the whole night. The Egyptians, who were absent from the festival, observed the night of the sacrifice, no less than the rest, by a general lighting of the lamps, so that the illumination is not confined to the city of Sais, but extends over the whole of Egypt. In Rome, the Feast of Light was named Saturnalia. According to tradition, the Saturnalia had been established in honor of Saturn when all of a sudden, after a lengthy and prosperous reign, Saturn suddenly disappeared. Imagine how scary that would be to have the sun just go out, like in the middle of the day. Macrobius wrote that in celebrating the Saturnalia, the Romans used to honor the altars of Saturn with lighted candles, sending round wax tapers during the Saturnalia. In his time, the festival was celebrated for 3 consecutive days. But Macrobius wrote, and yet, in fact, among the men of old, there were some who supposed that the Saturnalia lasted for 7 days. For Navius, that's probably where they get the word novice, says, long awaited they come, the 7 days of Saturnalia. And Mummius says, of many excellent institutions of our ancestors, this is the best, that they made the 7 days of the Saturnalia begin when the weather is coldest. Hanukkah and Christmas are both feasts of light, and like the Saturnalia, both can be traced to the days of the universal deluge. The Hebrew tradition that Hanukkah was established to commemorate the miracle with the oil that was found undepleted and sufficed for 7 days is a poor rationalization. A better ground for re-establishment of a holiday so similar to the Saturnalia in Judea was in the fact that in the middle of the 2nd century before the present era, Rome conquered Greece, and about the same time in the rebellion of the Hashmonaim, better known by the name of one of the sons, Judah Maccabee, against Hellenistic rule, the people of Palestine were drawn near the Roman world with its usages. It appears that the Romans fomented the revolt in the Hellenized provinces at the time of their conquest of Greece. Thus, the Feast of Hanukkah seems to be an adaptation of the Roman Saturnalia. The observation of this festival was later taken over by the Festival of Christmas, which was originally observed for 7 days, from the 25th of December until the 1st of the new year. Well, we still do that today. You get the whole week off. You go from Christmas to New Year's. Same thing. So it was to celebrate the nova of Saturn, which lasted for 7 days. The earliest of the festivals of this type that we know of was the yearly 7-day-long celebration commemorating the inauguration of the Temple of Ningirsu in Babylonia in the time of Gudea, what a name, before circa 2000 BC. For this and other similar festivals, P. Berbelis, Ancient Festivals of Saturnalia, 1964. Ningirsu was he who changed darkness into light, the same as Ninib, or Saturn. In Athens, the feast in honor of Saturn was called the Chronia, Festival of the Athenians, 1977. It would appear that the main idea behind the Saturnalia-type festivals, so widespread in antiquity, was a reenactment of the conditions that existed during the Golden Age, when Saturn reigned. The celebration of the Roman Saturnalia, which according to Macrobius, predates the founding of Rome by many centuries. 7, in parentheses, was marked by a reversal of social relations, the release of the statue of Saturn that stood in the forum from its bonds, Macrobius Saturnalia 7, the crowning a mock king, apparently representing Saturn, whose every command had to be strictly obeyed, Lucian, Saturn 2, 4, and 9, and who was later sacrificed on the altar of Saturn. Some details of such a sacrifice are given in
Acta Sancti Dasi.
Porphyry reports the existence of a similar festival on Rhodes, during which a man was sacrificed to Kronos. Oh, nice. Sacrifice has to be the second dumbest idea of all time. What if that deity had plans for that person? Assuming he exists, maybe he doesn't need the extra burden. You know, everybody always automatically assumes that it's a good thing to sacrifice somebody. For what? If you have the time, please take the poll on what is the worst idea of all time. War, slavery, sacrifice, or marriage. What's the deity like? Oh, isn't that sweet? He gave me a soul. Oh, I think I'll make it rain. No. Dumb. So that's why the natives always take him in, make him king for a day, and then sacrifice him. They're reenacting Saturn's catastrophe upon the earth. That's pretty amazing. A possible parallel in Mexico may be the festival of, I love these words, Atamotzli. On the 21st of December, they celebrate the festival of that god who they say was the one that uncovered the earth when it was annihilated by the waters of the deluge. Herodotus. 2 by J.G. Fraser, Adonis and Osiris, 1907. Macrobius noted also the opinion of those who think that the practice is derived simply from the fact that it was in the reign of Saturn that we made our way, as thou, to the light, from rude and gloomy existence to knowledge of the liberal arts. Tammuz and Osiris, on the Egyptian Light Festival in honor of Osiris. Saturn and Jupiter. The history of this pair, the ancient Kronos and Zeus, or Saturn and Jupiter, as reflected in many traditions all around the world. Oh, I gotta use my throat spray. I got new throat spray. Let's see if it works. Tells a story that has nothing in it resembling the sedate and uneventful circling of these bodies on their orbits that modern astronomy asserts as a fact. Saturn and Jupiter are very much like the Sun. Were they not planets, they would be considered stars. Like our Sun, Jupiter is nearly 330 times more massive than the Earth. It's hard to imagine. That's huge. And Saturn, 80 times. Both planets are covered with gases which are in constant motion, like gaseous atmosphere of the Sun. The Sun has 9 satellites and numerous asteroids and comets. When this was written, Jupiter had 14 and several asteroids and comets. Saturn had 10 known satellites, and 4 or 5 comets constitute the Saturnian family. Though these comets do not circle around Saturn itself, they are commonly regarded as related to the orbit of Saturn. Were Jupiter and Saturn free from the bonds of the Sun, they could be considered as stars or suns. Were two such stars set in space close to one another, they would constitute a double star system, both stars circling around a common focus. So I guess Old Sol could be considered the very first one that sucked all the air out of the room. The Sun is just a much bigger antenna than Jupiter or Saturn were, and it simply stole their juice. The Sun is fed by the galaxy, which is fed by the core. Were two such stars set in space close to one another, they would constitute a double star system, both stars circling around a common focus. As told, the picture that emerges from comparative folklore and mythology presents Saturn and Jupiter in vigorous interactions. Suppose that these two bodies approached each other rather closely at one time, causing violent perturbations and huge tidal effects in each other's atmospheres. Their mutual disturbance led to a stellar explosion. As we have seen, a nova is thought to result from an instability in a star generated by a sudden influx of matter, usually derived from its companion in a binary system. If what we call today Jupiter and Saturn are the products of such a sequence of events, their appearance and respective masses must formally have been quite different. A scenario such as this would explain the prominence of Saturn prior to its cataclysmic disruption and dismemberment. It must have been a larger body than it is now, possibly of the volume of Jupiter. Interestingly, for certain reasons, G. Kuiper assumed that Saturn originally was of the mass equal to Jupiter. At some point during a close approach to Jupiter, Saturn became unstable, and as a result of the influx of extraneous material, it exploded, flaring as a nova, which, after subsiding, left a remnant that the ancients still recognized as Saturn, even though it was but a fraction of a celestial body of earlier days. In Saturn's explosion, much of the matter absorbed earlier was thrown off into space. Saturn was greatly reduced in size and removed to a distant orbit. The binary system was broken up, and Jupiter took over the dominant position in the sky. The ancient Greeks saw this as Zeus, victorious over his father, forcing him to release the children he had earlier swallowed, and banished him to the outer reaches of the sky. In Egyptian eyes, it was Horus Jupiter assuming royal power, leaving Osiris to reign over the kingdom of the dead. If the descriptions of Saturn as a sun mean anything, Saturn must have been visible in the time before its explosion as a large disk. If this was the case, the increased distance between the Earth and Saturn could have been the result of the removal of the Earth from its place, or of Saturn from its place, or both. You know what I'm thinking? That this might be the yellow sun everybody thinks they remember. Think about it. Makes sense. Saturn could be removed only by the planet Jupiter, the sole member of the planetary family more powerful than Saturn. And indeed, the myth says that Saturn was removed by Jupiter. Worlds in Collision, Velikovsky wrote of events that may theoretically take place in the future. Some dark star, like Jupiter or Saturn, may be in the path of the Sun, and may be attracted to the solar system, and cause havoc in it. While, in 1950, both planets were assumed by astronomers to be covered by thick layers of ice. They are now known to be star-like in their composition and thermal properties. In the case of Saturn, H. Spencer Jones, Life on Earth 40, argued that Saturn must be coated with water ice or frozen ammonia. Spencer Jones' book was published in the same year in which Velikovsky drew very different conclusions about Saturn's thermal history and structure. The astronomers' conjecture was based on a simple calculation of the amount of heat reaching the planet. Saturn, being almost 10 times further away from the Sun than the Earth, had to have a mean temperature in the neighborhood of 155 degrees below 0 Celsius. The reasons why Velikovsky concluded that Saturn's temperature must be considerably higher than the accepted estimate were, first, in the residual heat of the catastrophe in which Saturn was derailed from its orbit, and second, the radioactivity that resulted from the catastrophe must still be pronounced on Saturn. From the unpublished manuscript, The Test of Time. On top of all this, based on its past history, Saturn can be regarded as a star and may have some of the mechanism that makes our sun burn with intense light. In 1966, Kellerman described his observations and measurements at a wavelength of 21.3 centimeters, which showed a temperature of 90 degrees Fahrenheit. For an inner atmospheric layers, revised textbooks, taking account of findings, began to speak of room temperature on Saturn, recorded in the 21 centimeter band. Okay, well, there you go. E.g. Fred Whipple. Fred Whipple. Earth, Moon, Planets. That's his real name. I thought that was the Sherman guy.
Earth, Moon,
Planets. Third revised edition, 1968. By 1972, measurements at radio wavelengths of 50 and 100 centimeters found unusually high temperatures, about 240 degrees Fahrenheit and 520 degrees Fahrenheit respectively. Thus, it appears that Saturn, like Jupiter, is not the entirely frozen wasteland it was once thought to be. D. McNally, Are the Jovian Planets Failed Stars, 1973. Soon it was realized that Saturn must have an inertial energy source, and is in fact more like a star than a planet, though it is not considered sufficiently massive to function as a true star. The article compares the view expressed only a few years previously by Carl Sagan that Saturn could not be an abode of life because of atmospheric temperatures several hundred degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Intelligent life in the universe. Moving on. Measurements in the infrared, far infrared, and submillimeter range published in 1977 indicate that the internal energy source on Saturn lies within the range of 2.3 to 3.2 times the absorbed solar flux. Far infrared and submillimeter observations of the planets, 1977, the Astrophysical Journal. In other words, Saturn gives off up to about 3 times the amount of energy it receives from the Sun. At the beginning of 1980, analysis of measurements taken by Pioneer 11 during its flight past Saturn showed that the interior of the planet has a temperature exceeding 10,000 degrees Kelvin, which is considerably hotter than the surface of the Sun, less than 6,000 degrees Kelvin. A hypothesis that the protoplanet masses of Jupiter and Saturn were nearly the same was advanced by G. Kuiper, See Sky and Telescope, March 1959. I definitely think Jupiter and Saturn are more like stars. The line between planet and star gets fuzzier every year. Sagan, after he mentioned that about Saturn in 77, when they found out that it was over 10,000 degrees, he didn't say a word about it, did he? There you are.
Time. He claimed that, in the earliest remembered epoch, the planet Saturn dominated the sky, close to the Earth. presiding over the mythic Golden Age. It was an outrageous idea, and yet I found in it the inspiration for a life's work. Ancient cultures the world over insisted that an exemplary sun once ruled the sky. For the Egyptians, this former power was the creator Atum-Ra, ruling from the center and summit of the sky. In ancient Mesopotamia, we see the primeval sun as a great turning wheel in the heavens, and the astronomers named this body as the planet Saturn. It was from the Romans that we received the planet's name, Saturn. But an archaic Latin name for Saturn was Sol, the sun. In earlier Greek texts, the planet Saturn, called Kronos, was also named Helios, the sun. Even the alchemists preserved this preposterous identity. They called Saturn the best sun. Best sun, superior sun, exemplary sun. The core idea always pointed directly to the axis of the sky, the celestial pole around which the heavens visually turn. As improbable as it may seem, this is where the Egyptians located their primeval sun god, Atum. This motionless spot in the heavens is precisely where later astronomical traditions from Greece to Persia and China all claimed that Saturn had ruled the world, a contradiction of every principle we take for granted today. Ancient chroniclers insisted that the planet Saturn, now just a speck in the sky, had presided over the Golden Age, an epoch of abundance, cosmic harmony, and grandeur. The archaic name of Italy was Saturnia, and tradition held that this very name was given to the original site of Rome. The Sabbath, the special day of rest and reverence, was Saturni Dies, Saturn's Day, a day honored throughout the Mediterranean, the Near East, and beyond. The popular Roman festival, Saturnalia, was a symbolic return to the Saturnia Regna, Saturn's reign, the Golden Age. Much symbolic content of our own New Year's and Christmas celebrations will trace to the Roman Saturnalia and related ancient festivals.
How it comes out, sitting here with the champ after the big fight with Jupiter. First of all, champ, I'd like to extend my condolences. Thanks, buddy. But you're lost, and you're not the you once were. Alright, thank you. Greg J. would like me to extend to you a season's greetings. Thank you. Good night.